This house belonged to my great-grandparents. 20 years ago, it had to be sold. My mother loved this house and was devastated when they had to sell the house. But it had to be done because nobody could afford the care for my great aunt and uncle. Fast forward, my mother gets sick, and in 2019, she's passing away. She was living 600 miles from here. As she was passing away, she kept thinking that she was living in this house. 5 months after my mother's death, we decided to come here, and I put my feet on the land and I prayed over the land. 2 weeks after that, the house became available for the first time in 20 years. A year after her death, I made an offer on this house. It was accepted. And a few months after that, I took the inheritance money that she gave me. I put it on the down payment of this house. And then on June 24th, the 95th wedding anniversary of my grandparents who were married in this house, we walked in as owners again. This wedding photo was taken in 1898, and it hung in the same place in the same house for about 100 years. These are my great-grandparents, Henry and Mary Zopp. Every time I would come to the house as a kid, the photo would be in the same spot. Our family had the home for over 100 years, and the house is about 160 years old, but we had to sell it 20 years ago. So my mom cleaned up everything in the house. She was the granddaughter of Henry and Mary, and it was her job to basically clean everything up, and she had to sell it in order to take care of Henry and Mary's last living children, who now had to be in a nursing home. So my mother sold everything, and she kept a couple of heirlooms to give to her kids, or we purchased things. I was blessed with this amazing antique photo, which I love. Unfortunately, the first night that I hung the photo, it broke and crashed. This was in 2002. I was devastated. The photo was actually an antique glass photo. When it broke, I was able to look behind it and see the most interesting thing. Photo had been hand colored with a very unusual type of paint, so that it almost looks like an illustration or a painting. But you look at the front of the photo and it's this gorgeous antique photo of Henry and Mary's wedding. For years, I kept the shards, the 8 pieces of glass, in a box, asking different people if they can work on it to fix it. Right now, my friend, who is an artist, is repairing this photo. The house became available again in 2019, right after my mom had passed away. By the grace of God, I was able to buy it a year ago. So now I am getting the picture repaired. I'll be bringing that photo back with a new frame and hanging securely in the spot that it had always hung for many, many years. Handed photos from 1910. These photos actually are from my great-grandfather and his kids. There's actually a dark room in the basement. The house had been in our family for almost 100 years. When we came back in and went in the basement, I was so surprised when I came to the door that said wine cellar over it. And even though we hadn't had the house for 20 years, my grandmother's name was written on it. Then there was a little sign that said, "Do not go in when the red light's on because we're developing film. It's a dark room." These two pictures fascinated me because it looks like my great-grandfather was posing. Kids are just sitting in chairs. Aunt Claire, she grew up to be quite the character. She's standing with a big smile on her face. And the next picture I see, Marie sitting on the left like this, and then Claire over his leg with like his hand up in the air. But what I know is that back in the day, you'd have to freeze frame the photo in order to get it to look like that. It's a legitimate picture that was caught of him spanking one of his children, or if it's a staged photo from back in the day. I'm standing in a basement that was built about the same time as the Civil War. I came across this picture of my great-grandfather in circa 1920, and I'm trying to find out where his bar was in the basement, and I think I found it. It looks like he was sitting in that corner. There wasn't this cabinet there or that. And the reason why I think that is because there was a door over there. And if you look closely at the artwork, or at least the remainder of the artwork, there was something there. There also were these holes where I think some of the things were hanging. The ceiling's very low. This was covered with lighting at the time. And that's where I think he had his pipe hanging. Now, my family had sold the house and we didn't have the house for 20 years. And I just came across this picture, and I do believe that that was where his bar was. And I'm hoping to recreate the bar in that same exact spot. In 1898, this photo was taken of my great-grandparents. It is over 120 years old. It had hung in this house for over 100 years, but the past 20 years it hasn't. We had to move everything out of this house and sell the house. But what's so exciting to me is that today I brought this photo back. Oh, it had hung on that wall right there for 100 years. I hung it on the wall in my house and it shattered into 8 different pieces. Well, I bought back the house just recently, praise God, and my cousin was able to glue it back together, put museum glass on the front and the back, and I am about to hang it back up. So here's the photo, and if you look, it cracked here. My cousin framed it so that you could see the colorization, the rare and antique colorization on the back. This is how they would colorize things. And this glass that she got is museum glass. So I am putting it back there where it always belonged, next to, this is my great grandmother Mary, and she was also on this wall for over 100 years, and I was able to bring her back, but we are going to put them right there. Okay, so there it is. You see a little bit of glare for now, but right next to Mary. She was 19. He was like 27. Of course, you can see them a little bit better, but this is the original, and then I'm sorry about the glare. All is right with the world. After 20 years of not being there, it's back. I just found out that parts of my home are insulated with vintage Playboy magazines. So my Uncle Emil, who was the youngest of 9 kids, who was raised here, confided in my cousin and said that he had placed vintage Playboy magazines inside of the walls as insulations, just so one day whoever owns the house will end up getting the surprise of their life, never thinking that the person that might own the house in the future and open up the walls would be his niece. I should have suspected something was up when I came across Nixon and sort of a half cutout version of a woman in a swimsuit. Nixon, right down from the screwdrivers. This is an abandoned bakery that's over 130 years old, and it used to belong to my great-grandfather. From 1897 to 1941, my great-grandfather owned a restaurant called Mauer Zapf, and I was able to get a little look inside. On the menu were things like oysters and seasons, steaks, chops, liver, vegetable, and relishes, but their specialty was rye bread. He also made homemade ice cream. My grandmother was a waitress there, and that's where she met my grandfather. Looks like it could have been where the bakery was. Do you have a flashlight? Look at the ceiling. Got these floors. What about over here? Go. Here we go. Look at the ceiling.
That looks fancy. That looks like something you would have.
That could have been in a restaurant.
You betcha.
Oh my goodness.
Look at that ceiling.
That had to have been
1920s.
Yeah, this might have been it. This is a 150-year-old Bible, and many people believed that it was a Freemason Bible. It looks like a regular Bible. Look how thick it is. It's kind of coming apart. What made me think that it either belonged to a Freemason or it was one of my relatives who was in contact with the Freemasonry. But I found these interesting things inside of the Bible. There's a couple of receipts. One is Security Benefit Association, the Knights and Ladies of Security. It's some kind of receipt by Ernest Spalding, who was a relative of mine. I think he was my great grandmother's on my mom's dad's side brother. Another receipt dated 1911 in pristine condition, by the way. This one's from 1922, and then I have another receipt 1909 from Mary, my grandfather's sister. Okay, so this must have belonged to them. Then this is the mysterious thing. This is a Freemason, some kind of calling card, and it says on the front, Uncle Tom Reber, Rockford, Illinois, and then look, 33. And on the back, Maine, 69. It may have been a lodge. I will look that up. Okay, but here's the gist of it. I've gone back and forth with this. All of you here have been like, get rid of it. And some of you have been, don't get rid of it. The Bible, I have reviewed it. It does not look like there's anything creepy about it or anything. It looks like a standard Oxford ancient Bible. However, with that being said, I am going to remove it from the house. So it's either going back to a Masonic lodge. I'm either going to sell it to be able to get some money to help me with building the house, or one of my relatives is going to take it. The special thing about this is this card. I've done some extra research and I spoke to my friend who's a pastor, and he's like, yeah, maybe it's just best that it's just not in the house. Break off those generational connections. So some of you may or may not agree with it. I'm waiting for some other family members to talk about it. This is the Freemason Bible. What would you do? It was January of 1919 and 10 of my ancestors were struck with the Spanish flu in this very house. There were 9 kids in this family, all under the age of 19. They all started getting sick around the same time. Most of the bedrooms were upstairs, but by doctor's orders, he asked them all to bring the beds downstairs and into one room, kept this room closed to guests, and kept all of the beds in this very room. In the kitchen behind me, my great-grandmother and my great-aunt would cook, make soups, and the doctor would visit every single day with the nurse, and they would come through the back door. And they said that they would look out the door and they would see hearses coming because there were so many people dying, but they all survived, including my grandmother. This very house, which was a safe house and a healing house for my family, it was in my family for almost 100 years, and we lost it for 20 years. And the irony of it all is that when the house became available, it was right before this pandemic, and I was able to buy the house back at the height of COVID. Imagine coming back to your family home for the first time in over 30 years, the place that you spent all of your summers, finding things that you had left there still in the house. Smell, still has the, You see the tub?
Yes.
And look, there's still things on here, and look in the corner over there. In 1982, my cousin was 11 years old and wrote his name on the garage, and that sign is still there, even though we didn't own the house for the past 20 years. Today, he gets to stand in front of it and see it for the first time.
These right here started keeping track when he retired what the odometer reading was on his bike. And I think it was out here even. Just start off with the
Instructions.
Oh yeah, the instructions. Yeah.
Has the oil in it, the ink. Here's a beer thing that had to have been from Emil's collection. And look, up here they would put these, see how you put the nail.
There you go.
We found that.
This was up here a couple years ago.
I practically fainted.